On today's Locked On Jayhawks, examining if KU basketball has enough three-point shooting to win a national title in 2025.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. You can tune into this show, Locked On Jayhawks, anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. And thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. On today's edition of the show, we're going to deep dive, examine the range that KU basketball could shoot from three based on last year, based on career percentages of who they have and who they added in the portal. Is that good enough for this team to be successful based on the roster and to win a national title? And we'll finish up as well with an interesting kind of scenario of what happens if something else happens and how that would impact the three-point shooting. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply with Game Time. All right, so let's start here. Let's add up based on what KU has on the roster, returning players, new players, to show a possible ceiling. Obviously, there is not a guarantee. Like somebody who shot 31% last year might shoot 38% next year. Somebody who shot 38% last year might shoot 34% next year, right? There's no guarantee about where these numbers are going to be. They're going to be exact from what they were the year before. We also don't have numbers on the freshmen. Now, I don't expect Flory Badunga to be taking threes, so I don't think that one will matter as much. But with Marquise Passmore, what happens if Passmore ends up being really good and, you know, as a freshman is playing 15 minutes a night, is playing 12 minutes a night, he's going to be probably at that point taking a 3 or 2 per game, right? How well will he shoot? I mean, we don't have the numbers on that. So this won't be a perfect thing, obviously. But KU was a team last season. This was a weakness for them, the three-point shooting. They were not a good enough three-point shooting team. They only shot 33.2% from three-point range. That percentage ranked 229th in the country, okay? So you're talking about a team who was not shooting it well in terms of percentage, and we know that. Obviously, the lack of spacing that it led to on the court for KU and made it tougher for the two big lineup, and there is a little bit of, well, because they played a two big lineup, it hurt their three-point shooting in addition to their three-point shooting not doing well, hurting the idea of playing a two big lineup, right? Those things kind of run hand in hand a little bit there. But they also didn't take a lot of threes last season. 17.3 attempts per game a season ago. The attempts ranked 336th in the country a season ago. So it's like, it's one thing if you're, I don't know, like middle of the pack. If you're 160th in the country in three-point percentage, but you're taking a good amount of them where it's like the math game starts to add up. But Kansas was not shooting them, or like, on the flip side, a team who doesn't shoot them a ton, but they're at least shooting them efficiently when they do. Like, you want to kind of gun for one of those two. The ideal world is that you're great at both. You're shooting them a good amount and you're making them at a high volume. But obviously that is a little bit, I don't know, fewer and far between. So Kansas was not good at either. They did not attempt many, 336. The percentage is not good, 229th. But they obviously attempted to overhaul this in the transfer portal. So now what can we expect from this team? Like, are they just better? Are they just a better three-point shooting team than they were last year? Which, you know, where's the bar to that? Are you just a little bit better? Or like, are you completely overhauled? Are you a much better team? And you look at, you know, past national champions. So I haven't included this year's UConn, but I know they would clear this number. But I go back and look at teams in terms of three-point percentage. So if I do include this year's UConn team, and obviously no 2020 champion, 23 of the last 25 national champions finished top 175 in three-point percentage. And it's even more prevalent nowadays because if I go back to 2018, which is when Villanova won the title with all sorts of pace and space, these are the rankings of teams in terms of their three-point percentage. This is not volume, but three-point percentage year by year since 2018. 11th, 8th, 1st, 51st, 62nd, and 72nd. So, like, you need to be good at it, right? You don't have to be the best in the country, but you need to be, like, basically top 100 at it. And if you go back even the years before, like 2017 North Carolina, they were 148th, but that team was great at like offensive rebound and all these things. 2016 Villanova, 105, 2015 Duke, 26, 2014 Connecticut, 24th. So like really over the past decade, you basically have to be top 100 or at least top 150 and then do a bunch of other things well. Kansas was obviously not that. Have they gotten to at least that bar? Well, here's the KU players last year that are back. So I'm not counting, obviously, Marco Jackson into this since he's not going to be playing for this year's team. He'll be out with an injury. So there's no point in adding him in to the stats. So DeJuan Harris was 28 of 73 from three-point range last season, which was a pretty good percentage, but low volume. KJ Adams was 0 for 3, which honestly, I did not remember him taking 3 3-pointers. I think I remember one of them. Anyway, Hunter Dickinson was 23 of 65, which ended up being a decent percentage in the mid-30s, but after the way he started and the way things kind of finished, it wasn't great. But also weird that Hunter only took 8 less threes than DeJuan Harris. Jamari McDowell then, he's back, and I don't know how much he'll be playing on this year's team. Maybe he ends up redshirting, but I'll count him in here too. He was 9 of 32 from three-point range a season ago. So total it up, among your 4 returnees, again, not counting Marco Jackson into this, that's 60 of 173, which is actually a decent percentage. It's 34.7% from 3. That would be much improved from last year, which based on, but here's the difference, 34 games played last year for Kansas. That means that's only 5.1 3-point attempts per game, so that's very low volume in terms of what you're adding. So what about the KU transfer additions? Okay, so Rylan Griffin shot a ton of threes. This is crazy. So those 4 returnees, I mentioned 173 combined three-pointers over 34 games. Rylan Griffin took 189 last season for Alabama. He went 74 of 189, which is also 14 more makes than the KU bunch in that sample. AJ Storr took 150 of them. He went 48 of 150. Zeke Mayo took 235 of them. He went 92 of 235. And then Shakeel Moore went 29 of 80, which is on the lower end by a pretty good margin among the 4 transfers you brought in, but it would have been the most of anybody that you returned. So literally your I guess your 4th highest volume 3-point shooter you brought in the portal would still be your highest volume 3-point shooter among players coming back. So total it up among the transfers you added, 243 made threes on 654 attempts. That means 37.2% from 3-point range. And on average, those 4 players played about 36 games played per player. So if you're totaling it up, you basically added 37% from 3 on 18.3 attempts per game combined from those players. Now, obviously, they have to share the ball now, right? Zeke Mayo goes from being by far the guy at South Dakota State to being, possibly a starter, possibly coming off the bench for KU. AJ Storr goes from being by far the top scoring option from Wisconsin to he might be at Kansas, but he's still going to have to split it with Hunter Dickinson. Rylan Griffin, that one probably will be about the same, but, you look at this still, 37% from 3 on 18.3 attempts per game. That's more attempts just from these 4 players. That's more attempts per game that they averaged between those 4 transfers you brought in than you did as an entire team last season. And it's much better percentage, 4% better. So add up those 2, add up the transfer additions, add up what KU has coming back on the roster, and you're starting from a point. And again, this is just based off last year's stats. We'll get into some of the career stats too to maybe give us a bigger sample size, but you're starting at a point of going 36.6% from 3-point range on 23.4 attempts per game. That sounds pretty overhauled for me from a season ago. Again, that would be 36.6% from 3 compared to 33.2. That is a huge difference. And the attempts go from 17.3 to 23.4. I mean, that's night and day. And that 36.6% from 3, if you just total up these numbers, that would have ranked top 35 in the country. That would have tied with Arizona. The attempts would have been just outside the top 100 in the country. That seems pretty darn good to me. And that's before you even factor in that you can find room for even more improvement. But again, we go to find the national champions over that list. Like I said, basically be top 100-ish. I mean, they by far clear that number in terms of what you would project based on all these players that you did add. Now, then again, like I said, you can go the other way and say, well, Zeke Mayo is not going to be able to take nearly as many attempts as he did last year. What if the percentage goes down? What if Rylan Griffin's percentage goes down a little bit with less space all around him than he had at Alabama than he does now playing with, KJ and Hunter, and what that can mean as a 3-point shooter, right? Those are entirely possible. But you could also argue that these players playing with Hunter Dickinson down low and a pass first point guard in DeJuan Harris is going to help the shooters actually increase their percentages and get more open shots, right? If they double team Hunter Dickinson, that's going to get somebody more of an open shot. So like, could AJ Storr, could Shakeel Moore, could they shoot in the mid 30% from three? Or I guess Shakeel Moore was kind of there this season. Could Shakeel Moore shoot 38% from three? Could AJ Storr shoot 35% from three, right? Could all the players just being a year older, which applies for everybody here, lead to just stronger numbers in general? And so if that happens, what if you get up to, say, 37% from three on over 20 per game? You'd be talking about the best three-point shooting team by percentage that Kansas has had since the 2018 team, and a team that's top 25 nationally at it, including top 10 among Power 5 schools. So the short answer here is yes. I think Kansas does have enough three-point shooting now. This was a real question going into last year. It was a question going into the offseason. And it's one thing, you added all these guys that you thought it would help. You could get nitpicky a little bit, though, and be like, yeah, but what if Zeke Mayo is only coming off the bench and playing this many minutes? And what if AJ Storr is only at 31%? I'm telling you right now, you look at all those numbers put together, it should be good enough for Kansas to be a much better team. Let's get more into some of those career numbers and then a scenario here coming up on Locked On Jayhawks. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So continuing on, what if we go to a bigger sample size? What if we go to the career numbers from three? Because maybe that'll be a little bit more sticky, right? Somebody could have had a career year shooting from three or a bad year shooting from three. The career numbers might give us a better idea of what to truly expect, because maybe that's too high of a bar. We said 36.6% from three. If you go off last year's numbers of what you're kind of bringing in here, that'd be top 35 in the country. It's one thing for this team to be better from three. That would be such a gigantic leap from last year. And again, you could make the argument that because Kansas is going to be playing a lot of KJ Adams and Hunter Dickinson, what if teams, basically are still able to say, hey, you have KJ and Hunter on the court. We're just going to face guard Rylan Griffin, and then we're going to say who else is going to beat us, right, from three-point range, and then we'll stack the paint. I don't know. Like that is possible that something like that could happen. But here's career numbers. DeJuan Harris, 87 of 223. KJ Adams, 0 of 7. Again, where are these 7 3-point attempts coming from? I do not remember these. Hunter Dickinson, 68 of 190. Jamari McDowell, 9 of 32. Zach Clements, we're adding on here. He is 10 of 40. Because if we're doing the career ones, obviously Clements didn't play last year, but if we add the career ones, we have to add Clements into this. Rylan Griffin, 115 of 325. AJ Storr, 86 of 244. Zeke Mayo, the number here is insane, 231 of 595. And then Shakeel Moore, 129 of 413. So total it all up, among the transfer additions, among the players coming back for KU, obviously, again, doesn't include the freshman year, that's 735 of 2,069. That equates to 35.5% from three. So that is a little bit lower than the number we just went to based off last season's number, which last season's number, again, 36.6% from three. So now you're down to 35.5% from three. But that's still an improvement off what you did last year. Again, last year, 33.2% from three. So you're over 2% better than you were from this year to last year. And that doesn't sound like a huge increase, but I'm telling you, it is over the course of the season. So if this one ends up being closer to, I guess, the floor for where KU is at, which again, you could go through these and say, okay, Zach Clements' career 10 of 40, that's 25% from three. I'm taking the over on that this year, right? Even if it's up to 30, that's an increase. Rylan Griffin for his career, based on these numbers, 35%. I'd probably take the over on that. Shakeel Moore's career, 31%. Probably taking the over on that too. Maybe you're taking under on the Dwan career percentage, around the same on Hunter, but both those guys are lower volume, so it's not going to impact it as much. Maybe you're taking the under on the volume for Zeke Mayo. Maybe the store career percentage is about the same. I don't know. But that's only half a percentage off of the 2022 national championship team. The 35.5% from three, right? You're not that far. And that team we thought of as being good three-point shooting, right? Ochai was a sniper from outside. Christian Brown wasn't a super high volume three-point shooter, but like he was a very efficient three-point shooter. Remy Martin hit a lot of threes. Dwan was kind of the same thing like that he is now, where it's like he'll hit some open ones if you leave him open and stuff like that. Jalen Wilson wasn't a great three-point shooter that year, but overall we thought of that as being a good three-point shooting team. It's only, if you go off the career numbers here, which again maybe represents more of the floor, it's only half percentage off of that national title team. It's still top 90 in the country. It still clears that bar. It still clears that metric of being around top 100 in the country to win a national title. So it's good enough for sure. And if that's closer to the floor idea, if the career one as opposed to the other one, and the ceiling is the previous numbers that we talked about from last year's number, but maybe even a tad more potential, because like I said, you can go individual case by case and say, yeah, but I think this guy could shoot higher than that. And there's a reasonable argument, as opposed to just saying, oh, but this guy shot 40%. Of course he'll go up to 45. That doesn't always happen, but I think there are reasonable arguments for some of the players. This does have a chance to actually be like a good three-point shooting team. And I think on paper, you figured you overhauled the three-point shooting. Is it just going to go from being a bad three-point shooting team to an average three-point shooting team, and will that be enough? But I think looking at it here through the lens of some of this stat deep dive, you could argue that it's going to go to being a good three-point shooting team, which that would be night and day in kind of figuring out the offense. And I think that's really exciting when you consider how that really does open up the court. Like I said, maybe a team does just say, hey, we're going to face guard Rylan Griffin, and then we're going to pack the paint. But I think AJ Storr will be a little bit better from three-point range. DeJuan Harris, maybe in his final season, will be willing to take another three per game or something like that, right? Maybe if that starts to happen, you throw out more lineups with Zeke Mayo on the court. You know, there are ways that you can work around that. You throw out more lineups with AJ Storr at the four, right? If those sort of things start to happen. Or maybe if you do face guard Rylan Griffin, it does allow you to play more 4-and-4 to open up driving lanes for AJ Storr and Hunter Dickinson. Or if they have to respect the three-point shooting and it is this good, you know, what does that make Hunter Dickinson? See, how much more efficient is he going to be? How many more points is he going to score inside? Is that going to open things up even more for KJ Adams, right? Is he going to be a even more effective driver of the basketball and finisher around the rim because it's more open? Will DeJuan Harris have more openings? Because we know DeJuan struggled in terms of his two-point shooting or shooting around the rim a season ago, right? Well, will that go back up? So I think there's a lot here that you should feel good about where KU should be at from three-point shooting for this upcoming season. All right, interesting scenario I want to talk about next, though. What happens if you get Zeke Mayo not getting as many minutes as maybe Shakeel Moore? How does that possibly impact things? Thanks for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you to the everydayers tuning in to each and every episode. And don't forget, we have plenty going on in the Locked On Podcast Network. You want to see what's going on in another conference with another team, you can find that here with the Locked On Podcast Network. Or if you're into trying to find your, you want to listen to an NBA team or an NHL team or an NFL team, well, you can find that here with the Locked On Podcast Network. So I think an interesting scenario here to all this three-point shooting, because part of what affects those numbers that we kind of went into was Zeke Mayo taking a high volume of threes, and he hit them at a very high percentage. But what happens if, because in our rotation projection, we had Zeke Mayo playing, I think it was 22 minutes and Shakeel Moore like 13, 14 minutes. What happens if Shakeel Moore actually usurps Zeke Mayo in the rotation on the depth chart? What happens if Shakeel Moore's playing 18, 20 minutes per game and Zeke Mayo's playing closer to 14, 15, 16 minutes per game? That just means that you're going to have less opportunity to get a lot of threes up. And if you're talking about Zeke Mayo being one of the two best shooters on this team, if he's getting less opportunity to shoot less threes, that means that you as a team are getting less probably made threes at a high rate. So how does that affect things in terms of this percentage? And so does that number go down to 34.5%? Does it go down to 35%? Like maybe that's still okay, but you start losing some on the margins here. And it does make me wonder, like how many minutes will Kansas be able to get away with a lineup of DeJuan Harris next to Shakeel Moore with KJ Adams next to Hunter Dickinson at the same time? Like it almost feels like to me, if you're going to play DeJuan next to Shakeel Moore, it has to be when like AJ Storr is in at the 4, and then you have Rylan Griffin in at the 3, or even Zeke Mayo playing as a 3 with like 3 kind of lead ball handlers and Hunter at the 5. Or if you're playing KJ at the 4 next to Hunter at the time, it has to be DeJuan next to either the 2 has to be either Rylan Griffin or Zeke Mayo. Like, I feel like that kind of maybe ends up being the case on the offensive side of the ball, but I guess it kind of feels like they need like 2 shooters on the court at all times. If Mayo isn't living up to the billing, and to be clear, like I am expecting him to still shoot the basketball well for KU, but it just gets a lot harder at that point. And I think the good news is Griffin and Storr could be on the court for 20 to 30 minutes together, but still, like that time one is on the bench is kind of perfect to have Mayo on the court to keep that going. So how does that impact it if Shakeel Moore is playing more minutes or is able to kind of usurp him on the depth chart? I think in an ideal world, Zeke Mayo is able to kind of fend him off because of the fit of needing that 3-point shooting. Not that Shakeel Moore won't be valuable, and he'll very much have a role for KU, and his defense will be, very important for KU, and you want him playing a big role in a real way. But that could certainly have a negative impact on how that is affected. So it's just about kind of finding the parts and how they fit and how you can make these lineups work. But I think KU certainly has more options and flexibility than they did a season ago to try to figure that out and try to figure out how you can get away with playing KJ next to Hunter and how you can figure out with playing, DeJuan next to Shakeel Moore and all these things. You have more options about how you can go about it, and you have more 3-point shooters to get it done. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll see you on Wednesday for another show. We're going to have Nick Schwert on with us this week to talk about who's the most impactful transfer addition for KU. We're going to get to 4 bold predictions ahead of KU football preseason camp. We got a Football Friday episode coming up, so make sure you're subscribed anywhere you get your podcast. See you next time with Locked On Jayhawks.